history is not just one damn thing after another. To understand the world we live in today, we need to visualize the short, medium, and long-term cycles of history, as well as the wider social environments they operate in. To each of these cycles corresponds a level of historical analysis, an individual level, focusing on people's interests and motivations, a network level, analyzing specific social groups that act consistently across longer spans of time, a systemic level, centering on the centuries-long lifespan of entire systems of government, and an ecosystem level, studying the changes in the technological, environmental, and demographic foundations of vast historical periods. Once we understand the recurring patterns resulting from the interactions between these four levels of analysis, we will view in an entirely different light both the current events unfolding around us and the very different futures that await us. We must also learn about the motivations and ideologies that power up individuals, groups, and institutions over time. Ideas matter, but they are deeply interconnected in a reflexive feedback loop with the individual, group, and institutional life cycles I just mentioned. In this segment of the Lafayette Gambit, we will take a closer look at how the social dynamics of these feedback loops operate in both theory and practice. And in the next segment, at how ideas and values shape and power them up. The first historian to have focused on the internal dynamics of history was 14th century North African author Ibn Kaldun. He's best known for his monumental history of the Islamic world, where he studies the rise and fall of dynasties across his region. Ibn Kaldun attempts to classify the events he narrates and explain them by means of general rules that unveil history's hidden mechanisms. His most lasting contribution is the concept of asabiya, or group solidarity, that powers the cohesion of social groups and provides them with a decisive competitive edge against their rivals. Ibn Khaldun noticed that group solidarities have their own life cycles of approximately 3 generations. A group's asabiya is strongest under charismatic and determined founders, rising from the desert and conquering urban centers of power. It consolidates under the 2nd generation of leaders, still familiar with the group's heroic beginnings, but begins to decline by the 3rd generation, born into the wealth and comfort of cities and ill-prepared to confront the next social group rising from the desert with a much stronger asabiya. The modern historian who pushed Ibn Khaldun's work the furthest is Peter Turchin, a Russian social scientist now living in the United States. He based his own extensive research on Ibn Khaldun's original insights, but also on the work of modern authors such as Robert Putnam, who developed and popularized the concept of social capital of groups and societies. As Francis Fukuyama explained, the resilience of social capital is directly related to the level of trust existent among individuals, as well as between them and the larger groups and institutions they belong to. The more trust, the better can individuals converge across social and spatial divides to cooperate and achieve common goals. Lack of trust results in lower level of cooperations and therefore weaker social capital and asabiya. This increases their risk to fall prey to more cohesive, more dynamic competitor groups with radically different aims and social projects. Our age is the age of reason, which started in 1754 with the 7 Years' War, the first global conflict. It consists of 6 periods of some 6 decades each, exactly 3 generations based on our modern lifespans. The first, revolutionary period, comprises the great Anglo-French rivalry culminating in the Napoleonic Wars. The second, consolidating period, is the stable and largely peaceful Vienna Congress era, shaped by Austrian Chancellor Clement von Metternich and his balance of power system between Europe's major states. The third, disintegrative period, takes us from the start of the Balkan Wars of the late 19th century to the conclusion in 1945 of the 30-year-long European Civil War, marking the end of European global hegemony. The fourth, restorative period, marks the attempt of the USA and of its allies to protect the modern nation-state system from the challenges of universal totalitarian ideologies. The final period, commencing just now, remains open-ended and is vitally important, as it will determine the nature of the next secular cycle that will begin towards the end of the 21st century. This secular cycle, the last of our third global age, will be either one of regeneration and convergence or dislocation and catagenesis. Turkin went on to develop the field of cliodynamics, or science of history, aiming to systematically understand series of events, group them into recurring patterns, and predict which societies are on the ascendant and which are in danger of collapse. He theorized that the strength of a group's asabiya is the key factor explaining the performance of institutions. Institutional life cycles are much longer, however, than those of social groups, stretching over periods of some 3 centuries, during which time they also pass through foundational, consolidating, and declining phases. This is what Fernand Braudel called the longue durée, or the long-term historical perspective, and what Turkin refers to as secular cycles. These secular cycles are themselves grouped into vast millennial ages, global ages, separated by moments of catagenesis. Our global age is the age of Enlightenments and is composed of 6 secular cycles of some 3 centuries each. Each one of these 6 secular ages constitute a coherent institutional era with its own rise, consolidation, and decline, culminating with the replacement by a new institutional system fueled by radically different worldviews, ideologies, and dynamics. To sum up, individual motivations are embedded in social groups' life cycles spanning some 3 generations, which in turn are part of institutional dynamics lasting approximately 3 centuries. Transitions between social groups contained within a larger institutional system call for incremental changes. Shifts from one institutional system to another require radical transformations. These secular cycle transformations are caused both by internal group dynamics and by the changing factors of the larger social environment, such as technology, demographics, and the natural environment. Failure to come to terms with the need for radical changes and to be prepared for them leads to catagenesis, dramatic institutional collapse, and profound transformations of social and physical landscapes. We can now envisage the entirety of human history as grouped into 3 global ages and 6 eras. The first 2 global ages both culminated in periods of globalization of the geographic area they encompassed, which were brought to an abrupt end by moments of catagenesis, out of which emerged a new and totally different global age. The 6 long eras we can identify, and that are each centered on a particular waterway as the key medium of contact, communication, and commerce of its civilizations, are the Pharaonic and Akkadian eras, constituting the palatial civilization's global age, the Hellenic and Roman eras, making up the Herculean civilization's global age, and our own global age of enlightenments, beginning with the Islamic era and continuing to this day with the Euro-American era, which, as we have seen, is about to enter into its last 60-year cycle. Our actions over the next decade will determine how this cycle will set the stage for the longer historical era about to start. We will either pave the way for an international convergence era and a global governance era, at the end of which will emerge the cosmos civilization, which will mine the sky, defend the earth, settle the universe. Or then a global catagenesis era, similar to the ones that abruptly terminated the globalization periods over the first 2 global ages. This would usher in a new global era that the outlines, institutions, and values of which we can not even begin to comprehend today. Because we find ourselves in a period of transition, not just from one 60-year cycle to the next, nor even from one secular cycle to the next, but at the tail end of an entire 2,000-year-long global era. Our institutions are now at their weakest and most vulnerable point. This is why the actions of individuals and social groups can now have disproportionately large consequences as to the direction humanity will take in this upcoming fourth global age. The next 10 years will thus decisively shape the 60-year cycle we are about to enter, the last in the age of reason. And that will determine the nature of the last secular cycle of our third global age. In turn, this will lead to either catagenesis and dislocation on a truly global scale, or allow us to transcend previous historical patterns and step with eyes wide open and of our own free will into a fourth global age based on the values that matter most dearly to us: peace, prosperity, participation, and respect for the dignity of every human being.